Greetings, my brother. It's been a long time.
How good and how pleasant.
Remember Prospect Park?
Exactly.
New York.
Yes.
Yes, I. Brothers and sisters, I'd just like to greet everyone here, at the Prime Minister's lecture. And the theme is refocus, recreate, and redesign. So I'm saying to our people, in a very positive and solemn way, that our people are at a particular juncture in our development, and we are saying it's time for us to unite. Yes. It's just plain and simple. COVID lockdown, all of us was locked down. We are not responsible for the COVID. We know that, we know the truth, we know who are responsible. But I'm saying to our people, I'm looking at St. Kitts and Nevis, Lion Megan, who is the center of the Pan-African movement in this 21st century. We have the ability, we have the focus. It is time to show example to our people globally. Because even though we're small, we Talawa, as we say locally. You know what I'm saying? Yes. So I'm saying to our people in a very solemn way, this political division that the Queen has put on us, you know what I'm saying? In a realistic way, this Westminster system has to go. There's no doubt about it. I'm saying to our people, brother, Babylon system is in crisis, and it's time for African people to regain power. It's as simple as that. Brothers and sisters, we could show and make example to our people globally because we are global people. We were kidnapped and brought here. And it's time for us as African people to determine our destiny. In the name of the Honorable Marcus Garvey, Patrice Lumumba, Dr. Martin Luther King, Marcus of the Woods, Betta Douglas, it's time for African people to liberate themselves. What Granny said, plant weed, buy local, support your own, free the land and get rid of this colonial system. And I greet you again in the name of His Imperial Majesty.
To educate and liberate the minds of the people, of their history, spirituality, social and political issues, all of national interest. Redemption Cry, hosted by the Rastafaris every Monday night right here on Win FM 98.9 from 9 p.m. until 10.
Yourself, don't deny yourself, be alright with yourself.
Young sisters, in the name of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie Jah, Rastafari, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, elect of Himself and light of the universe. This evening, brothers and sisters, we'll be discussing the whole question of reparations. And joining us from the People's Republic of Brooklyn is Brother Roger Wareham. He's an attorney at law and a comrade in arms. Brother Roger.
Hey, peace, brother.
Peace. We're on the air now, so as I was saying to our people here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis and those listening to us via the internet, the World Wide Web, this is Redemption Cry, hosted here by the Rastafari brethren, and this evening we'll be discussing the whole question of reparations. And we'll start basically first with what is the meaning of reparations, what it is all about, so the people can get a proper understanding. So introduce yourself to the people of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Certainly, brother. I am, my name is Roger Wareham. I'm a lifelong political activist. I'm a member of the Dec.12 Movement, which is an organization that Kalonji knows well and he participated in, was a member of. It's an organization of people of African descent who are committed to upholding and defending and fighting for the human rights of people of African descent. It is a Pan-African organization. It fights for our people's right to self-determination. And it has been in existence for over 20 years, and some of its founding members, of which I'm one, have been involved in the struggle for African people's liberation for more than 40 years. Can you hear me? Hello? Kalonji, can you hear me? Am I getting any feedback?
Yeah, we could hear you.
Oh,
We
okay.
hear you loud and
Okay.
clear. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, what I was saying, I forgot to press the button anyhow. So I was saying that give our people a general understanding and an outline of what reparation is and what it means.
Sure. Reparations is not a difficult concept. It is a very simple concept. It comes from the word to repair, and the idea behind reparations is that damage has been done. There has been an injury that has been caused, and the victims of that injury need to be repaired. They need to be made whole. They need to recover from the injury they sustained. In terms of reparations that we're talking about for African people, for the African diaspora, for those of us in the Caribbean and in Central and South America, and in North America, reparations is speaking to the injury that we sustained from the transatlantic slave trade and slavery in the respective countries in which we were brought and left. It's for I know for those of us in North America and I think in several countries of South and Central America, it's for the type of racism that was developed to justify slavery, that continued after the formal abolition of slavery, that has kept us in the most inferior economic and political and social positions in the societies in which we find ourselves. So reparations, in the view of those of us in the December 12th movement, is the key issue for African people in the 21st century, because reparations speaks to our development collectively, individually, as countries where we exist as countries, as nations. The reparations speaks to the wealth that was created by the colonial countries, that was robbed by the colonial countries from the labor of enslaved Africans. That we worked, we created the wealth throughout the Americas. That wealth was taken back to Europe. It was used for the benefit and the development of Europe, both in terms of science and industry and intellectually, in terms of the surplus wealth that was created by our unpaid labor, gave their class the leisure time to be able to study, to be able to devote time to scientific research, to be able to make the advances in science and technology that put them in the forefront of the industrial world that we exist in today. So reparations speaks to a crime was committed. You know, we have a slogan up here. So they stole us, they sold us, they owe us. And reparations is not a handout. Reparations is not a gift. Reparations is not a loan. Reparations is being repaid for the work that we've done. And so it's the work that our ancestors have done, the work that our ancestors did, who created the wealth that their ancestors benefited from, and the descendants of those ancestors find themselves in a position of power and privilege in the world today. We find ourselves in a position of powerlessness without our human rights being recognized. And so reparations speaks to the correction of all of those things. So that's why we see reparations as the key issue for African people in the 21st century. Because if we address reparations, we address the question of our development. Can't hear you.
I looked in the dictionary yesterday, and in terms of Webster's dictionary, the definition, it said the definition is the payment of damages indemnification, specific compensation in money or material payable by different nations for damages to or expenditures sustained by another nation as a result of hostilities with the defended nation. So basically, that is a general understanding. Now, another understanding is that reparations could be described as money, labor, goods, services, anything done to make up for a crime against an individual or a nation. Reparation to make amends for a wrong or injury, to make whole again. I think that's basically described, that give you a general understanding of what reparation is. Now,
Right.
as we establish that, our people down here, when I raise the whole question of reparation, it seems strange to them because it's not something that they're familiar with, and it's something new to them, And you being an attorney, I would like for you to give us your explanation, if you know of anybody else in the world that have gotten reparation from nations that did wrong to other nations.
Yeah, you know what? It may seem like a foreign concept to people, but it really isn't, because you know that if you're in a Anita St. Kitts and you get hit by a municipal bus and you're injured, you expect to sue the bus company and to get money to cover your medical care, to get money to cover the time you lost from work, to get money that may, to make you whole again. And so reparations is really no different than that. The crime that we sustained was a crime of kidnap, murder, rape, and stolen labor, for which we've never been repaid. So, that's the concept. And it's always interesting, whenever Europeans are concerned, they're very clear about reparations when it comes to them. Very ironically, when Toussaint Louverture and Dessalines led the Haitian Revolution and led Haiti to being the first independent black republic in the Western Hemisphere, the French settlers, the French colonialists, demanded reparations from Haiti for the plantations they lost, for the enslaved Africans who were freed, for the property they lost. Not only did they demand reparations from Haiti, they forced Haiti to pay those reparations. So once Haiti achieved independence, one of the reasons that Haiti right now is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere is that Haiti was forced by the international community to pay France back for its liberation. So Europeans have no difficulty in recognizing reparations because they got it from Haiti, and Haiti was forced at the risk of being completely isolated by the international community. They were forced to pay millions upon millions of dollars to France for having liberated themselves from slavery. In the United States, some of the Native Americans have gotten some form of reparations. The Japanese who were incarcerated during World War II, Japanese Americans, American citizens of Japanese descent, who were put in concentration camps during World War II because the United States was at war with Japan and therefore suspected anybody of Japanese descent of being a possible collaborator. All Japanese Americans, regardless of whether they were citizens, were put in concentration camps. They received some funds from the United States government by an act of Congress about 20 years ago for their incarceration. So they received reparations.
Roger, let me, as you were saying that, let me give them an outline because I have the information right in front of me. Country and people who got reparation. Year 1952, from Germany, reparations 822 million to German Jewish settlement. Year 1971, USA 1 billion and 44 Alaska Native land settlement. Year 1980, USA 81 million Kiamatas of of Oregon, those are Native Americans. 1985, USA, 105 million. Sioux of South Dakota, Native American again. And 1985 again, USA, 31 million. Chippewa of Wisconsin, those are Native Americans. 1988, USA, 32 million. Native Americans again of Michigan, Ottawa of Michigan. 1988 again, Canada, 230 million Japanese Canadians. 1990, Austria, 25 million Jewish claims on Austria. 1990, USA, 1.2 billion and 20,000 each for each Japanese American that was interned in concentration camp in the United States. So that is just a general outline of people who have got reparations already.
And Israel and many survivors or descendants of survivors of the Holocaust still receive reparations. There have been also private lawsuits against some of the countries, the banks of some of the countries of Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, who had gotten monies that had been put in, or property that had been put in there by Jews, and hid it and misused it. There was lawsuits against them that they wanted, and the reparations are paid for that. It's only when it comes to the question of reparations for what was done to us, to African people, that it always starts to get fuzzy in the public's mind. In 2001, the United Nations held a World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa. We participated in that, and we participated. As a matter of fact, we had actually were one of the non-governmental organizations, or was actually the key non-governmental organization that was instrumental in having the UN even have this World Conference Against Racism, because the European countries and the Western countries did not want there to be a World Conference Against Racism, because they understood that if there were a World Conference Against Racism, the focus was going to be on white supremacy, the focus was going to be on the unjust wealth that they have, how they got it, and how they've maintained it. And so they fought against it. But if the conference was held, one of the three key issues that we put forward in that conference were the issue of the declaration of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery as a crime against humanity, the economic basis of racism, that racism is not simply a psychological disorder, there's an economic basis to it. And the third and key issue was reparations for the victims, for the descendants of the victims of this crime against humanity. And in the first one, the recognition of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery as a crime against humanity was very important, because under international law, crimes against humanity have no statute of limitations. It means that you could always prosecute them, you can always sue for them, because it's not like with other crimes like robbery or rape or assault, that after a certain period of time, you can no longer prosecute anybody for it because there's a statute of limitations. But on crimes against humanity, like genocide, there are none. And so that was a very, very important meeting. That was a tremendous victory for African people, to have the international community declare that the transatlantic slave trade and slavery were crimes against humanity, so that it gives us some ground to organize and to push in our own countries, wherever we reside, to make the powers, the countries, the corporations that benefited from our stolen labor accountable for the wealth that they stole.
Now, saying all that, Roger, I don't know if you're familiar with Lord Anthony Gifford, the legal basis of the claims for reparation by Lord Anthony Gifford, British Queen's Counsel and Jamaican Attorney. Yeah. A paper presented to the First Pan-African Congress on Reparations, Abuja, Federal Republic of Nigeria, April 27, 1993. An introduction, he says, the enslavement of Africans was a crime against humanity. 2, international law recognizes that those who commit crimes against humanity must make reparations. Number 3, there is no legal barrier to prevent those who still suffer the consequences of crimes against humanity from claiming reparations, even though the crimes were committed against their ancestors. Number 4, the claims will be brought on behalf of all Africans in Africa and in the diaspora who suffer the consequences of the crime through the agency of an appropriate representative body. 5, the claims will be brought against the governments of those countries which promoted and were enriched by the African slave trade and the institution of slavery. Number 6, the amount of the claim will be assessed by experts in each aspect of life and in each region affected by the institutions of slavery. Number 7, the claim, if not settled by agreement, would ultimately be determined by a special international tribunal recognized by all parties. Now, basically, I just give you that basic outline so people listening to the program could have a basic understanding. Now, what I want you to do is to put on your legal hat. You know, you being a lawyer, that we want to show people that we stand on legal grounds in terms of the whole question of reparation when it comes from nation to nation. And then later on, we're going to go into where we could sue companies that was involved in the slave trade, like insurance companies and banks. Now, I just want to give you a brief outline here in terms of our situation. In St. Kitts, back in 1834, when slavery was abolished, in the sense that emancipation came, but you had another 4 years of what you call it again? I can't remember the term at this time, but you had another 4 years where it was officially abolished in 1830, where you had another apprenticeship period for another 4 years, where, so if it ended in 1834, you had to go to 1838. Now, the British financier, Baron Rothschild, agreed to underwrite the bond issue, and a committee was established to set the value for each slave, a formidable task. The compensation for the 19,780 slaves in St. Kitts was 329,393 pounds. The slaves themselves received nothing for the years of labor. Now, that is what the planters, the people who owned us, got back in 1834. So we now outline the legal basis on which we stand. I want you to describe that to our listeners so they could get an understanding that we are not just talking off the top of our head. We are dealing with things that are legally based and have international statutes or international law attached to it, where we could take the people who enslaved us, whether it's England or France, because the two of them colonized St. Kitts, had slavery here back in slavery days. So I want you to point out to our listeners that we stand on legal ground. And then later we're going to go into the insurance companies and the banking institutions. So take it from there.
Well, you haven't left me much to deal with. You laid it out. I think and particularly with the British, because the British kept very, very detailed books in terms of all of their financial transactions, in which they included slavery as a financial transaction, because Africans were regarded just like a bale of cotton or a bottle of rum or a barrel of molasses. And so they kept very detailed records of their transactions. And I think it's very easy to show the connection between the companies that did business that were established by the Crown for the benefit of the Crown, how slavery benefited them. I think the major obstacle in terms of suing countries for the reparations that were due is the same when you sue private companies. It's this issue of the statute of limitations. It's the task before us is translating the Declaration of the World Conference Against Racism, that the transatlantic slave trade and slavery as a crime against humanity, to make that a part of each country's domestic law. Because right now it's a declaration, but it's now, how do you make that part of the domestic law? And I think, you point out to, you wanted me to point out to the listening audience that we have a legal basis. We have to understand that the law is something that's set up by man. It reflects the interest of usually of the ruling class, but in many cases you can get advances in the law if you're organized and there's a mass movement to force them to do what's right. In and of themselves, they're not going to do it. I'm not that familiar with the governing party and body of St. Kitts and Nevis, but I know in many instances, so-called independent countries in the Caribbean are still under a tremendous amount of undue influence by their former colonizers. And so they are not going to take steps that will challenge those colonizers or jeopardize their political or economic situation, which is why it's so important that your listening audience understand what reparations is, why it is due them, why it is due us, and why people need to be conscious of it, and then once they're conscious of it, need to organize around it to make it a demand of the country. One of the reasons that they came in and overthrew Aristide the second time around was because Aristide had taken the position that the French had to pay reparations to the country of Haiti. That they had to do two things. First was to repay Haiti from all the, at this point, billions of dollars that Haiti had paid France, and then on top of that, that the Haitian descendants of the enslaved Africans of Haiti were due reparations for the labor that was stolen. And so, it's important to understand that there's a legal underpinning, but the legal underpinning is only as strong as the mass movement that is demanding that it be enforced.
Well, saying that, right, we are so-called independent country. Let's say that we are celebrating 25 years of independence. Mm-hmm. And, it's very strange to me that, we are a member of the United Nations. No, mm-hmm. we are in a different position to Africans in the United States, where we control the government structure of our country. So we could move a motion, the Prime Minister could move a motion in the House, or any member of Parliament could move a motion in the House to bring reparations to Parliament, right? And what I'm saying is that they could do this, but none of them are doing it. You see, so...
That's what I'm saying. It's that the fact that there's a legal basis is not enough if there's no political will. That the law is not something, one of the myths that we get brought up on is that the law is independent of man, that the law that, in the United States they say we are a country of laws, not of men. But that's absurd because it's men who write the laws, men and women, and it's men and women who enforce the laws, decide what laws to enforce and decide what laws to ignore, and decide what laws to change if it becomes politically inconvenient. And that's why I said that if your political leaders won't do that, the question of reparations has to become an issue that anybody who's seeking elected office has to address. That if there's enough movement on the ground of the mass of your people saying, this is an issue we want to address because this will speak to the development of Nevis and St. Kitts, that the monies that are due us, and it doesn't have to mean coming to people individually, it can mean coming to the country in terms of projects money that will be used for health care, or for a better education system, or for better communications. There's different ways and different forms that reparations can take. But the political leadership may not deal with it unless they feel it's an issue that the masses of people are demanding.
Well, that's, you see, now you said that. We here are waging a campaign. We have a organization, the United Laomegan Party, because we're planning to take part in the next general election. It is June next year, and our main theme is reparation and unification. That we want our people to unify themselves so we could struggle for reparations. And if get elected to Parliament, That is one of the first things we're going to put forward in terms of a bill. Because, like you said, we stand on legal ground. But our people have to be educated. That's where you see, you being an attorney, that's why we invite you this evening, so you could explain to our people that we are not just talking off the top of our head. We stand on legal ground. Now, I'd just like to read something. The Royal African Company. The Royal African Company was a slaving company set up by Stuart family and London merchants once the farmer retook the English throne in the English Restoration of 1660. It was led by James, Duke of York, Charles II, his brother. Originally known as the Company of Royal Adventures Trading to Africa, it was granted a monopoly over the English slave trade by its charter issued in 1660 with the help of the army and navy. It established trading posts on the West African coast, and it was responsible for seizing any rival English ship that were transporting slaves. It collapsed in 1667 during the war with the Netherlands. The very war it started by having Company Admiral Robert Holmes attacking the Dutch African trade post in 1664 and re-emerged in 1672. In the 1680s, it was transporting about 5,000 slaves per year. Many were branded with the letter DY after its chief, the Duke of York, who succeeded his brother on the throne in 1685, becoming James II. Other slaves were branded with the company's initial RAC on their chest. Now, that company, you understand, was trading slaves in St. Kitts and Nevis. You see? So we are showing our people that we stand on historical ground also. Because I have all the information, I emailed them to you today so you could take a look. But the information, I went to the archives and check it out, and there's a lot of information in England. Now, when we're dealing with banks, Royal Bank, Barclays Bank, and I think is Lloyds of London, which is the insurance company, we know basically that before 1837, right, the first bank that was established here in St. Kitts was the Colonial Bank, and that was established in 1837. Right? Let me just read it here for you. This was certainly a far cry from the laudatory description of the town and its buildings found in earlier writings going back to the mid-17th century. In spite of the sad state of the economy, St. Kitts' first bank, the Colonial Bank, right, opened in 1837 as a result of a merger became part of Barclays Bank. The event solved several problems which had been present on the island for centuries. Letter of credit could now be easily obtained for international trade and a chronic shortage of coinage. Now, I give you those information to show you the links, basically. The first bank, the Colonial Bank, was merged with Barclays Bank. Now, before the bank was established, all trade in slaves in terms of insurance companies and banking institutions was done from England. But when the first bank was open here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we see basically, we know they start doing business locally here on the ground. So based on those information, I send you all of that information so you can make a determination in terms of the insurance companies and the banking institutions, if there is legal ground where we could sue these companies, because Lloyd of London's in particular started out as a coffee house and became a major insurance company, and Barclays Bank also.
Certainly.
So
Certainly,
basically, expound on that.
Yes, certainly, because the slave trade, the trade in African slaves, could not have survived and they flourished without particularly insurance companies, because the insurance companies and banks, because insurance companies made it a feasible financial endeavor, because bringing thousands of enslaved human beings over the Atlantic Ocean in a trip that took months, sometimes weeks and months, was a risky endeavor. And so they had to know that they would get some return on their investment in case of the ship went down, the numbers of Africans who died en route, uprisings, rebellions, and so it couldn't have been done without the involvement of the insurance companies. And similarly with the banks, in the United States, there's several banks who they'd give out loans or mortgages to people for their plantations, and the security for those loans were enslaved Africans. And so the same, and
so what you're saying, basically the Africans were collateral?
That's right. We were collateral for the loans, just like any other property, And so in some instances, when the plantation owner defaulted on a loan, the banks ended up being the actual owners of enslaved Africans. J.P. Morgan Chase merged with at least 2 or 3 banks that we know of that had held slaves as collateral and or actually owned them outright. And so when you look at the history of most of the major financial institutions in the United States, they're tied up with the slave trade and with slavery. Back in 2002, I was one of the lead counsel in lawsuits that were filed against corporations who had benefited from the slave trade and slavery. I mean, corporations like J.P. Morgan, Fleet Bank, New York Life Insurance, Lloyd's. It was a number of, I think it was at one point 17 major financial institutions, several of them, like Lehman Brothers and Morgan Stanley, who are now in the middle of this whole economic crisis that's going on around the world, that we sued them for their relationship to the slave trade and slavery. I hope you don't mind all this noise in the back. We're having our regular Monday night strategy meeting, so sometimes it gets kind of noisy. But we sued them in a class action across the United States for reparations. And the major problem we ran up against in terms of the lawsuits, which recently, after 6 years of litigation, were dismissed on the federal level, was the statute of limitations. That as far as the courts in the United States are concerned, they still do not recognize slavery as a crime against humanity, and therefore they looked at the statute of limitations, and their position was that somebody who was 6 years after slavery under the United States, the statute of limitations ran, and after 1871 you couldn't sue for reparations, even though most of the enslaved population was illiterate and didn't even know that they had any right to do that. And then the other issue the problem we ran into, was what in the United States, I'm not sure in terms of how the British system works, it's called standing. It means that when you bring a legal action, you have to be able to show the injury that you yourself sustained, and that injury was caused by one of the people or one of the companies that you're suing. So the problem we had, because different than with the British in other countries, much of the information when Africans were brought to the United States, their names were changed, their whole history was almost destroyed, and it's very difficult to be able to show that James Brown, the great grandfather, was on a plantation where New York Life Insurance Company insured that slave owner, and that there was a connection between John Brown, who's suing now in 2002, and his relative, who you're claiming was insured by New York Life Insurance. And so the problem we ran into in the suit was not having the documentation to be able to show a straight line back from our ancestor to the particular defendant that we had sued. And so that was the basis on which the courts finally ended up dismissing the suits. Now, it's not over yet in that sense, because even though we lost at the federal level, we're still exploring suing in the different states, because one of the things that has happened over the last 10 years in the United States is that there's been a real growth in the reparations movement. Because I think 10 years ago, the situation in the United States around people's awareness of reparations is probably, it sounds like what you're describing now in your area. But due to our organizing, the World Conference Against Racism, and constant organizing, we made reparations a real issue to people, that people saw its relation to them. And one of the things that happened around the country was that different cities around the country, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Detroit, passed legislation which said that any company that wants to do business with our city has got to disclose, has to go through its records and disclose what ties it had to the slave trade and slavery. If they don't do that, we will not sign, and they will not be able to get business with that city or state. And because of that, that's where we found out, and that's why we found out the information around J.P. Morgan Chase, because they had to disclose that they had merged with banks that owned slaves. And so that's been one of the real important things. We're starting to get more and more information, and as we get more information, it'll be simpler, it'll be easier to show the direct ties between James Brown's or John Smith's ancestor and these different banks and insurance companies and tobacco companies and railways who made their profit and owe their existence today to enslaved, the stolen labor of enslaved Africans.
Yeah, Brother Roger. Well, you have a difficult task, but the case that you was involved with the sister there, the one, because I saw the video clip when I logged on our website, right? Explain to the listeners the victory that you all got in that particular case in terms of reparation, in terms of suing certain companies. I think it was Wachovia.
Well, let me tell you this. The victory is a political victory rather than a legal victory in that sense, because by bringing the lawsuits, what we did was we helped heighten people's understanding of the struggle for reparations, the right that we have to reparations, and the different obstacles that these companies put in your path in the 21st century to prevent you from getting reparations. So we haven't, at this point, have not won legally in the sense of getting any funds from these companies, but what it has is it's kept us on the political burner. And even, earlier you were talking about the reparations that different entities inside the United States, the Japanese, different Native Americans received. Those reparations didn't come, but none of them won lawsuits. What the lawsuits did was it sparked a political demand, and excuse me, in most cases, like the Japanese, the reparations that the Japanese got, the Japanese Americans who were incarcerated in the U.S. during World War II, got their reparations from an act of Congress. They had initially sued in court, and then they had lost in court, but the lawsuit had sparked a political demand and a mass movement that forced the U.S. government to recognize and to admit what everybody knew was wrong in terms of their incarceration, and then to pay the reparations. And so we haven't won any legal battles yet in terms of companies saying, okay, I'm going to pay reparations because you sued us. But what it has done is it's created an atmosphere where it's much more likely for that to happen. But as you said, it's very difficult, but nothing, I saw this saying the other day, and I don't know how familiar your listening audience is with Harriet Tubman, but the saying was, sometimes I get so tired, but then I remember what Harriet Tubman did for a living. and I don't know, Harriet Tubman was an enslaved African prior to the Civil War in the United States, and she escaped from slavery in the South and made her way up north where she was free. And rather than just stay there and just live her life in freedom, she went back to the South, I think, some 20 or 30 times to bring enslaved Africans with her. And she was known as a general, and there was a huge reward on her head. And she was never captured, and she did this all by foot, and she never lost anybody who she brought out. And so, when you say things are difficult, that's why that saying is so, sometimes I get so tired, but then I remember what Harriet Tubman did for a living.
Yeah, I was saying that, right? And, through the victory of Brother Barack Obama, all the politicians,
and Barack Obama,
all the politicians here in the Caribbean and in St. Kitts and Nevis, particularly, is emulating Barack Obama. They even move a motion in the House to recognize Brother Barack Obama. No, they could easily move a motion in the House for us to get reparations also. I mean, just starting it because, we stand on legal ground. But that's why you see we're trying to educate our people. That's why the United Liamegan Party, which we are dealing with, which we create and we want to move forward, that if we get elected, we'll bring a motion in the House, move a motion in the House to deal with the reparations. And from nations to nations, you go to the international court. You could take England and France to court and get your reparations money. So basically that's why you see we have this program this evening, because we want to educate our people. That it is not an easy task, but it's something that could be done. And once you're educated about it, we could take legal steps in order to deal with this situation in terms of reparations.
And you are in a better situation than we are, because at least you're close to the helm of government. You could. We're not. The United States doesn't represent us. So, but in St. Kitts Nevis, in the countries, you could, like you said, you could take them to the World Court, because in the World Court, only individuals can't bring countries into the World Court. It takes one country to bring another country. So if St. Kitts and Nevis took took Great Britain or
France
to the World Court around reparations, that would create a tremendous groundswell around the world in terms of this whole issue. And like I said, reparations will only come to the extent that we fight for it. We African people never get anything simply because it's owed us. We get it because we fight and claw for it. And it's the same thing with reparations. So I think it's very important what you're doing, because if your people are educated to what reparations is, it's simply, if your political party, by the platform it runs on, makes it an issue, it makes it an issue that everybody else who's running for office has to address, it will educate your populace around, what the possibilities are. And regardless of how you fare in the election, you will have made it an issue that can no longer be ignored.
Exactly. You see, the reason why we're running, because a strategy to bring it to the attention of our people, because if you're not involved in the process, certain issues won't be raised, and the whole question of reparation is a very important one. That's why you see our campaign is based on reparation and unification. What Granny said, they stole us. What Granny said, they stole us. What Granny said, they owe us billions for reparation. As you stated before, but we say our slang down here is what Granny said. And what Granny said, we have a serious difficulty here with electricity. And we say, what Granny said, don't throw away your lamp, because it's a possibility that electricity might go. So on the whole question of reparations, as you said before, if we educate our people and make a serious attempt to show not only our people here in the Federation, but throughout the whole CARICOM countries, that reparation is something that we could struggle for and attain. Brother Roger?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So I'm saying to you, you being an attorney, that when you explain to our people basically that you stand on legal ground in terms of nation to nation, if we take England and France to the World Court, that is something that they have to address, and that is something that our government could do. but they don't have the political will. For instance, the Prime Minister, I think it's earlier this year, last year, when they had the whole centennial, I think the 200 years of the abolition of the slave trade, right? On CARICOM, the Prime Minister was representing CARICOM, and he brought it up in the UN, but he brought it up on behalf of CARICOM. What I'm saying to you, these CARICOM leaders could also bring it in their legislature to do with the whole question of reparations.
Well, I know in the United Nations, in the World Conference Against Racism, particularly Jamaica and Barbados were very strong around the whole issue of reparations. And so you should speak to some of the brothers and sisters over there in terms of coordinating the struggle and exercising pressure within CARICOM with those countries that are at least open to it, and that might help give some backbone to your own political leadership.
That's very interesting, because I think in Jamaica there's a serious movement around the whole question of reparations, and Lord Anthony Gifford, as we talked about before, I was trying to get him on the air to deal with that situation, but he's so busy, The last time I called, they said that he was in London, but I have his the whole paper that he wrote on reparations. But like I said, we want to start something here that could ignite the whole all the Africans in the Caribbean to see that we could struggle for reparations, because our people in general, the masses of people, they don't have a proper understanding. They don't have the slightest idea about what reparations is. So when we raise these questions, we want to show them basically that it is not a joke. It's something serious and something that could something that we could win. But we have at least about 5 more minutes, Brother Roger. So in your summing up, just give us a summation. And this is round 1. We'll do many more in the future, especially in the new year. But we just wanted our people to have a basic understanding of what reparation is, So in your summation,
I think in summary, we have to understand we cannot minimize our history. We were brought over as capital. We were brought over as chattel. We were brought over as a commodity. Our humanity was not recognized. We were brought over as a profit-making vehicle, and a whole ideology called racism was developed to justify how so-called European Christians could enslave another human being. And they developed this ideology of racism to say, well, these people, if you want to call them people, they're like subhuman. And their skin color is proof of that. And therefore, that gave them justification for committing a crime against us. We cannot buy into that. We have to understand that we are human beings, we have human rights, and what was done to us was a crime, and not any old crime, but a crime against humanity. Our labor was stolen, our were raped, our children were murdered, the continent we came from was plundered, and our labor was stolen. We have never, ever, ever received compensation for that. And under international law, compensation is due for crimes against humanity. So we have to have a basic understanding of that. And once we understand that, then we begin to take the steps in whichever country we're in to force our political leadership to understand that and to respond to that. And we have to make them accountable. That they cannot be elected if they refuse to deal with an issue which speaks to the future development of our country. That the CARICOM countries, if they had the resources that they were due based upon the wealth that they had created over the centuries, would be in a much different position. They would not have the problems of poverty, would not have the problems of poor education and poor health care and lack of housing and lack of electricity in the 21st century that could be eradicated. And reparations is the issue that will address all that, because reparations speaks to shaking loose the wealth that resides in Europe and the other Western countries that are really due the descendants of the victims of that crime against humanity that created that wealth. And so I hope that the people of the Confederation listen to your show, listen to the party, take up the struggle, study, get more information on reparations, and make their political leadership respond to the demand and be accountable. You know, as we say, as Granny say, they sold us, they stole us, they sold us, they owe us.
Yes, my brethren. And you know what Granny say? They stole us, they sold us. What Granny say, you know what I mean? Because you see, Granny is very important in our history here and in our culture, because Granny is all knowledgeable and she have the history. And she told us basically that, you know, they stole us, they kidnapped us, they sold us, so there was billions for reparation. And we have an estimate, you know, we work out an estimate, $700 billion that the British and the French.
Just about the bailout in the U.S.
Exactly, you know. So we're saying that 80,000 of us, and not only those here in the Federation, but those in the diaspora, each citizen could get at least $10 million for themselves. So that's the basis in terms of, you know, what we're dealing with here in the Federation, that each citizen could get $10 million for reparation that is owed to us. But Brother Roger, your parting words, you know.
One of the things we talked about in the struggle of reparations in the U.S. is that we don't even deal with people getting money individually. What we talk about is the reparations we want is a collective reparations, that we were not enslaved individually, we were not worked to death in the fields individually, we were worked to death because we were African, and that we see the resolution of the reparations struggle being a collective one. So we see it in terms of the funding of institutions of medical and social and educational and communications institutions for us as a people, as opposed to somebody waiting for a check to come into their box, because it is a collective problem we face. It was a collective enslavement we faced. It was a collective crime that we were victims of. And so that's what we're fighting for.
Yeah, blessed love.
Reparations now.
Yeah, reparation now. What Granny say?
Well, that what Granny say. Reparations now.
Reparation now. Peace, my brother.
Okay, take care, man.
Give
Peace.
thanks. One love.
One love.
There you have the brothers and sisters, Brother Roger.
Redemption Cry, hosted by the Rastafaris. A program to educate and liberate the minds of the people of their history, spirituality, social and political issues, all of national interest. Redemption Cry, hosted by the Rastafaris every Monday night right here on WinFM 98.9 from 9 p.m.
Close to thee, Lord, close to thee.